For 3,000 years, the most powerful rulers who ever lived in the ancient world looked out at their subjects from temple walls, from colossal statues, from golden death masks and painted sarcophagi, in images that their own artists created according to strict conventions of idealization. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt were not portrayed as human beings. They were portrayed as gods, or as the earthly representatives of gods, rendered in a visual language designed to communicate divine power rather than individual humanity. The pronounced jaw. The perfectly symmetrical features. The serene, ageless expression that conveyed eternity rather than mortality. For centuries, that was the only face that history had given them. And then science did something that no amount of archaeological excavation, no amount of textual analysis, no amount of art historical scholarship had ever been able to do. It looked past the art, past the ideology, past the 3,000 years of idealization. It looked at the bone, at the skull beneath the wrappings, at the physical reality of the person who had actually lived inside the myth. And what came back when the CT scanners and the forensic software and the facial reconstruction algorithms had finished their work was not the face of a god. It was the face of a human being. And that face, in every case, was more surprising, more moving, and more historically significant than anyone had fully anticipated. The technology that made all of this possible did not exist a generation ago in the form that has now been applied to the mummies of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. Computed tomography, the CT scanning technique familiar to anyone who has had a medical scan, uses X-rays taken from multiple angles to construct a complete three-dimensional image of whatever is being scanned. When applied to a mummified body, it allows researchers to see through the linen wrappings, through the resinous materials applied during the embalming process, through the outer layers of the preserved remains, and directly to the underlying skeletal structure without disturbing a single thread of the original wrappings. The mummy does not need to be unwrapped. It does not need to be touched. The scanner produces a complete three-dimensional model of the skull from thousands of individual X-ray slices, assembled by software into a virtual object that can be rotated, measured, sectioned, and analyzed from every angle without any physical intervention whatsoever. That three-dimensional skull model is the foundation of everything that follows. Forensic facial reconstruction, the technique used by law enforcement agencies worldwide to produce likenesses of unidentified individuals from skeletal remains, applies a set of established anatomical principles to the skull model to reconstruct the soft tissue that would have covered it in life. The depth of soft tissue at specific anatomical landmarks on the skull, the thickness of skin and muscle over the brow, the cheekbones, the jaw, the nose, and the chin, follows patterns that have been extensively documented in populations worldwide and that allow researchers to build up a three-dimensional approximation of the living face from the underlying bone structure. The technique is not perfect. It cannot recover information about hair color, eye color, or precise skin tone from the skeleton alone, but it produces a face that, for specific architectural features, the nose shape, the jawline, the brow configuration, the overall proportional relationships, reflects the actual individual with a fidelity that no artist's reconstruction based on stylized ancient portraits could approach. The face that emerged when this technology was applied to the mummy of Ramesses II was the result of a collaboration between Sahar Salim, a professor of radiology at Cairo University, who has CT scanned more than 40 royal mummies throughout her career, and Caroline Wilkinson, the director of the Face Lab at Liverpool John Moores University in England, whose team has used forensic facial reconstruction to bring historical figures from Richard III to St. Nicholas back to life. Salim made a three-dimensional virtual model of the pharaoh's head and skull from CT scan data, effectively thousands of X-rays assembled into a three-dimensional image, which Wilkinson then used to reconstruct his face with computer software used in criminal investigations. What the reconstruction produced, first at the age of death, and then through a process of age regression that Wilkinson's team applied to show the pharaoh in his prime, was something that the colossal statues of Ramesses II, standing in temples across Egypt, had never quite conveyed. The result, according to Salim, was the face of a handsome pharaoh. She described the reconstructed face as a very handsome Egyptian person with facial features, characteristic of Ramesses II, the pronounced nose and strong jaw. The features that the ancient Egyptian sculptors had incorporated into their idealized portraits of the king, the prominent nose, the strong jaw, the confident proportions, turned out to be grounded in the actual physical reality of the man. The artists were not inventing an idealized fiction in those specific details. They were, within the conventions of their medium, reflecting something real about the person they were depicting. Next, Wilkinson used computer-generated imagery techniques to add skin, eye, and hair textures based on what Salim reported would have been common among Egyptians at the time, and finally used age regression software to show how he had likely appeared decades earlier. The age regression was the most challenging aspect, as this involved changing both his skeletal structure and his facial appearance. The software that allows researchers to reverse decades of aging from a skull To reconstruct what the bone structure looked like when the person was 45 rather than 90 is the same technology used in modern forensic investigations and in the entertainment industry for digital de-aging of actors. Applied to a 3,000-year-old mummy, it produced the first scientifically grounded portrait of Ramesses II, as he would have looked at the height of his power, in the middle of the 66-year reign that made him the most celebrated pharaoh in Egyptian history. Ramesses II ruled from 1279 to 1213 BC, a period that encompasses some of the most dramatic events in the ancient Near East. He fought the Hittite Empire to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC, the largest chariot battle ever recorded, and subsequently negotiated what is considered one of the world's first known peace treaties. He built more temples, erected more statues, and fathered more children than almost any other pharaoh in Egyptian history. The temples at Abu Simbel, carved directly into a sandstone cliff in what is now southern Egypt, with their 4 colossal seated statues of Ramesses, each 66 feet tall, are among the most spectacular architectural achievements of the ancient world. The face that the CT scanner and the forensic reconstruction software produced from his mummy is the face of the man who ordered all of it built, the face of the person behind the colossi. The most recent reconstruction of Ramesses II, led by Brazilian graphics expert Cicero Moraes, aimed to depict the king's aging features accurately. It highlighted the pronounced veins on his forehead, signs of memory loss, and poor dental and bone health, including a pronounced overbite and significant tooth wear. This second reconstruction, depicting the pharaoh as he actually appeared in his final years rather than at his prime, produced a portrait of extraordinary human specificity. The veins on the forehead, the overbite, the worn teeth, the physical evidence of a body that had lived for 90 years in the ancient world, carrying the weight of an empire for 66 of them. The reconstruction also compared the reconstructed face with statues of Ramesses II, finding good compatibility with the shape of the nose, and in some situations the shape of the face, but also significant differences, demonstrating that while ancient Egyptian sculptors incorporated realistic elements into their work, the conventions of royal portraiture produced significant departures from physical reality in other respects. The reconstruction of Amenhotep I presented a different kind of challenge and produced a different kind of revelation. Amenhotep I was the second pharaoh of Egypt's 18th dynasty, who ruled from approximately 1525 to 1504 BC, and whose mummy holds a particular distinction in the history of Egyptology. It is the only royal mummy that archaeologists have never unwrapped. When the mummy was found in the late 19th century, it was in such exceptionally good condition, with its original wrappings intact and decorated with elaborate floral garlands, that every subsequent generation of researchers had declined to disturb it. The face of Amenhotep I had literally never been seen since the embalmers wrapped it 3,500 years ago. CT scanning changed that without touching a single thread of the wrapping. Cicero Moraes combined data from various sources, including computed tomography scans of the pharaoh's skull taken in 2021, and work that was part of a broader project led by paleoradiologist Sahar N. Salim of the University of Cairo and a renowned Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, who virtually unwrapped Amenhotep's mummy using advanced CT scanning. The scans revealed not just the skull, but details about the pharaoh's physical condition, including his skeletal structure and some preserved internal organs. The face Moraes revealed deviated from traditional depictions of Amenhotep Foner in statues and artwork. One noticeable difference was the pharaoh's overbite, or retrognathism, a feature not typically represented in the statues of Amenhotep or other Egyptian rulers. The idealized portrait tradition of ancient Egypt, which rendered its pharaohs with perfectly aligned, powerful jaws, had smoothed away the physical reality of a man whose actual dentition was noticeably different from the ideal. While the reconstructed face matched the statues in certain areas such as the nose, the overall facial structure was more gracile in the forehead and more projected in the chin area. The face that emerged from 3,500 years of sealed wrappings was specific, individual, and human in ways that the artistic tradition had not and could not fully preserve. Amenhotep. I was deified after his death, one of the rarest honors in Egyptian history, worshipped alongside his mother Ahmose Nefertari for centuries after his reign ended. The fact that the god, who was worshipped in temples dedicated to him across Egypt, had an overbite, had a forehead slightly different from his own statues, was a real person with real physical characteristics that his own artistic tradition glossed over, is not a diminishment of his historical significance. It is an enhancement of it. It transforms a deified abstraction into a human being who lived, who ruled, who built, and who was remembered with such reverence that his subjects made him a god. The reconstruction of Amenhotep III, the pharaoh sometimes called the richest man who ever lived, extended the picture further. Amenhotep III, one of the greatest pharaohs of ancient Egypt, reigned during the height of Egypt's power 3,400 years ago. Known for his unparalleled wealth and grand architectural achievements, a scientific reconstruction of his face had never been attempted until a multinational team of experts, including Cicero Marius, unveiled the true likeness of this legendary ruler, using advanced forensic techniques and data from his mummy's skull. Michael Habicht, an archaeologist at Flinders University in Australia who spearheaded the project, described how Amenhotep III's actual appearance was quite different from his statues, of which there were many. The reign of Amenhotep III produced more statuary than almost any other period in Egyptian history, a deliberate program of self-representation that left his idealized face on monuments from Nubia to the Nile Delta. He described the result as a placid face for a man who promoted peace and lived in a time of the greatest economic prosperity, highlighting the contrast between the serene visage and the powerful image portrayed in ancient art. Marius and his team utilized data from individuals with a high body mass index to reflect the pharaoh's robust appearance. The final result, a complete bust with detailed colors and facial features, offers a vivid glimpse into the past. Seeing a complete bust with these colors and the facial serenity is quite satisfying, Marius remarked, describing it as a gift to all those who appreciate history. Amenhotep III's reign was one of the most peaceful and prosperous in all of Egyptian history, a period of extraordinary diplomatic activity in which he maintained correspondence with rulers across the ancient Near East, whose letters to him, preserved on clay tablets found at Amarna, constitute one of the most remarkable diplomatic archives from the ancient world. The face produced by the forensic reconstruction is the face of the man who wrote and received those letters, who built the temples, who managed the wealth, who sat at the center of the ancient world's most powerful empire at its peak. What all three of these reconstructions share, beyond the technical sophistication of the methods that produced them, is the capacity to produce an experience in the viewer that no amount of reading about ancient Egypt has ever quite been able to generate. When you look at the reconstructed face of Ramesses II, not the statue, not the artistic idealization, but the face produced by algorithms working directly from the geometry of his actual skull, you are looking at something that no human being has seen in 3,000 years. The specific combination of features, the exact proportions of forehead to jaw, the precise shape of the nose, the configuration of the cheekbones, was last visible to the embalmers who wrapped the body before sealing it. The people who built Abu Simbel to honor this man, the generations who worshipped his statues, the modern scholars who have spent their careers studying his reign, none of them have seen this face. You are among the first humans in 30 centuries to see it. That is an experience that bypasses the intellect and lands somewhere more immediate. It makes the past present in a way that nothing else in Egyptology has managed to do quite so directly. The technical challenge of producing these reconstructions honestly is worth understanding because it reveals both the power and the limits of the method. Caroline Wilkinson articulated the difficult part, noting that what comes after shape, the surface textures, skin, eye, hair colors, these textures and colors are estimated through discussions with Egyptology experts as the most likely appearance. The age regression was the most challenging aspect, as this involved changing both the skeletal structure and facial appearance. The color choices are informed by historical evidence, by ancient Egyptian artistic conventions, by population genetics, and by scholarly consultation, but they involve judgment calls that a different team of researchers might make differently. A grayscale version of the Ramesses reconstruction was also produced to avoid making definitive judgments about his complexion. The honest approach to these reconstructions acknowledges uncertainty where uncertainty exists and makes the reasoning behind each decision transparent. The broader program of royal mummy CT scanning that Sahar Salim has led over the past 2 decades has produced results beyond facial reconstruction that have transformed the understanding of the physical lives of Egypt's pharaohs. The CT scans have revealed the causes of death, the injuries sustained in battle, the diseases that afflicted rulers at specific points in their reigns, the physical consequences of the royal lifestyle, and the specifics of the embalming techniques applied to individuals of different status and different periods. Ramesses II's scans revealed evidence of severe dental disease, of arthritis in the spine and joints consistent with decades of military campaigning, and of the physical toll of a 90-year life in the ancient world. The bones tell a biography that the official inscriptions, always triumphant, always idealized, never provided. The program is not finished. Salim has CT scanned more than 40 royal mummies throughout her career. The archive of data already collected contains information that will continue to produce new reconstructions, new health analyses, and new biographical portraits of individuals who ruled one of the greatest civilizations the ancient world produced. Each mummy in the collection is a sealed archive of physical information that the people who created it could not have imagined would one day be readable. They wrapped the bodies to preserve them for eternity. They preserved them better than they knew. Not just the physical remains, but the information encoded in those remains. The measurements of the skull, the geometry of the jaw, the density of the bone, the wear of the teeth, the evidence of disease and injury and age, all of it waiting in the wrappings for the technology that could finally read it. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt spent their reigns projecting an image of divine, ageless, perfect power. The CT scanners and the forensic reconstruction algorithms have looked past that image for the first time and found behind it what was always there: people, with pronounced noses and strong jaws and overbites and worn teeth and veins on their foreheads at 90 years old. Human beings who built civilizations and fought wars and managed empires and were eventually wrapped in linen and placed in stone sarcophagi and forgotten for 3,000 years, and who are now, one reconstructed face at a time, becoming visible again. Not as gods, as themselves. That is what shocked everyone who saw the results. Not that the technology worked, that the faces it revealed were so unmistakably real